Back to the show. We're going to go back to Michigan and Senator Patrick Colbeck. Senator, thank you for rejoining us again after we talked about Pennsylvania and the suits going on there and with the campaign. You talked about you're tired and you're frustrated when people say there's no evidence. You're saying, hey, today we showed evidence and we're going to show more evidence. We got 8 minutes in this segment. Can you just walk through, in your mind's eye, what is the evidence you presented and why it's evidence?
All right. Well, today we were focused on the process itself of holding a high-integrity election. So one of the key terms associated with that is something called chain of custody. It's the same thing as chain of custody when it comes to a criminal trial, except in this case we want to assert that the validity of the election results. And so I usually, if you go to letsfixstuff.org, I got a list of about 12 different artifacts in the chain of custody, but I'm just going to focus in on 4 if that's okay for right now. And the first one is a key one. And by the way, you break any of the links in this chain of custody, you break the integrity of the election. And the higher up in that chain you break it, everything downstream of that chain, of that link, breaks as well. So I'm going to start off with the top link in the chain of custody, and that's the qualified voter file. That's the list of people who are eligible to vote in the state. And in the state of Michigan, I think we talked about this last show, we were highlighting that there's 8.1 million registered voters in the state of Michigan. The only problem with that, if you go off and do a demographics analysis, is that only 7.8 million actually have achieved voting age here in the state of Michigan. So there's a 300,000 vote gap there alone. Then we did an analysis of the first-time Detroit absentee voter, and about 50,000 of those. There was about 50,000 of them in total. And we had some grassroots volunteers that go off and do the work of analyzing that. They found out 680 people that are extremely dedicated to the election process because they were dead and they had voted. We found another 12,000 that were so dedicated that they didn't even have a home. They were living out in the middle of a blank field. So they were so dedicated to get out to vote that they didn't have a place to live, but they were going to go out and vote. And a lot of examples like that all the way across the board. Then we get to the next key link in the chain of custody, and that is the poll book. The poll book is essentially a precinct-specific extract of the qualified voter file. And in it, this is something that's put out at the to the election officials, to the poll workers, so that they can verify the identity of everybody who submits a ballot to go off and vote. So if you're voting in person, you'll see it with the poll workers. They'll be sitting there. In some states, you're required to show an ID. And in Michigan, you can ask for an ID, but you're not required to show an ID. And verify who you are. And if once they verify who you are, they hand you a ballot. And then you can go off and vote. If it's an absentee ballot, that you're voting via absentee, then they've got to verify that the signature that you have on the ballot envelope matches the signature that's in that poll book. And if it doesn't, then you're not eligible to vote. Well, in the city of Detroit, what happened was that they really kind of had 4 different versions of the poll book. They had the initial electronic poll book that was a pull of the qualified voter file from the state effective the Sunday before the election. Then in the middle of the night, they started slapping down pieces of paper that were kind of referring to as a supplemental paper poll book. And then they started typing in any names that weren't in the poll book yet directly at the direction of the Detroit city clerk. Against that backdrop, there was actually a separate instance of the poll book at the precincts where people were voting in person. And what that opened up the door to is that somebody could actually vote twice. If you submitted your absentee ballot late enough in the process, and it checked off by the absentee voter precinct that you had voted, well, that's not going to show up in the in-person poll book. And so you could have actually voted twice in the city of Detroit, the way they configured their election processes. So poll books are a very important area as well. Then let's skip down to the next item here, a key artifact, and that's the ballot themselves. I mean, we heard about all the late-night drops of ballots. They've already admitted that they weren't secured at all. There wasn't a seal in there. Supposedly, these ballots came from the Detroit Elections Bureau and the city clerk's office, and they had validated all of the signatures of all these absentee ballots, and then they were just submitting them to us at 3:45 in the morning to go off and get counted at the county boards. There was no seal. There was no chain of custody. There was no control over who put envelopes in there, who didn't put envelopes. And that's a big concern. We also have the drop boxes that were located all across the city of Detroit. Thanks to good old Zuckerberg money, about $250 million, he made sure that there were a lot of drop boxes in predominantly Democrat communities so that they would have all kinds of opportunities to drop them without any sort of chain of custody regarding who controlled, who put what in there. So somebody could dump in 100 ballots there and nobody would know. They say that they're monitored 24/7, but they haven't seen any footage to that effect. So the ballots is another key one, obviously. And then the last one, the one that I keep harping on regarding information technology, because, you know, Stalin's quote is pretty famous, right? It's not he who votes that counts, it's he who counts the vote that counts. So this vote tally, you know, is the end of the line in regards to the election. That's what everybody's interested in. They're interested in seeing those final vote tallies. Well, I went in and I highlighted that the connections, there were the tabulator computers and the adjudicator computers and the local data center, if you will, for that Detroit AV Counting Board were all networked to each other, and you can go over and you can show the routing of a cable that connected to the internet, and you could see the proof that they were all connected to the internet. If you go look in the bottom right-hand corner of all your Windows 10 based PCs, and you see the little window in the bottom, there's a little icon that if you roll the mouse over there, it says connected to the internet. But all the Detroit elected officials that I contacted that night refused. They said specifically that it was not connected to the internet. And from my background, I know differently. It was connected to the internet. And why is that a big deal? Because the way most normal precincts operate in my old Senate district is that the only time that they would start reporting out the vote tally.
I tell you, Senator Colbeck, hang on for one